Thanks for coming on to DIY University. My name's Emily Boulin with Sally Crew at Sally Beauty. And today we're going to be discussing how to lift through permanent color to prepare our hair for vivids and pastels this spring. So before I begin, I actually want to talk about prepping the hair before we even begin the application process and the technique on how we're going to do that safely at home. So the reason I want to talk about the prep for this is because I think something that gets missed and we get a lot of hair fails on is when we're trying to lift the hair, we use lightener and things happen in the foils that we're not totally aware of. And a lot of times it's because the lightener's reacting with something that's already going on in our hair. There is a big hair myth that says you should have dirty hair before using lightener or color. And I'm here to say I don't necessarily agree with that. So what I would say is we want to clarify the hair. So what that's going to do is naturally in water, there's occurring minerals. But if you have hard water or well water, or you live in areas where those minerals are in a higher quantity, they can actually cause your foils to expand. They cause quicker chemical reactions, and you might not get the lift results that you want. So what I would encourage you to do is actually use the ion clarifying treatment. So this actually comes in a little packet. You can use an applicator bottle. You mix it with warm water. There's directions on the back, but you would apply that in the shower when washing your hair to prep it for your lightening service. When you do that, it's going to turn into like a gel-like form, and you're going to scrub your hair. The only thing I want to say about using this is use it sparingly because it's removing buildup and minerals that you don't want. It's also going to be removing natural oils and things that we need in our hair. So this is only something you want to be using before doing a very intense color service or when you feel buildup because of the minerals in your water. But please use it sparingly, but it is important to make sure we remove as many of those minerals and that buildup as possible before going into our lightener service so that we can get the best color possible, but we also don't run into issues that we didn't expect along the way. The second thing, after you use that clarifying treatment, you're then going to use the pre-color treatment from Ion as well. Now, what this is going to do is this is a porosity equalizer. And that is going to condition the hair, bring the porosity down to a more neutralized level, because when we use that clarifying treatment, it's so abrasive and it's scrubbing the hair that we want to replace some of those nutrients, but we also want to make sure that our hair is ready to receive lightener and the lightener is not going to damage it further. So when we use those two products before even beginning our color service, that is going to set us up for the best results possible. And these are just little things I want you to know, because I feel like when we do our hair at home, we're so quick to grab all of the coloring materials. And this is something that could actually change how that has gone for you in the past. So now that we know how to prep the hair, the next thing I want to focus on is parting the hair. If you've taken any of my classes or seen any of them on DIY University, I'm very big on parting, and I am going to be again. So a great tip for DIYers when doing a process like this, because we're using lightener and it's timed. So we can only let that lightener sit. Generally, most lighteners are going to be removed after 45 to 50 minutes. So if we're working on lightening our whole head, a lot of times because we're doing it ourselves and we don't have somebody else doing our hair, it's going to take us longer. And you don't realize it until you're halfway through the head and you go, oh my gosh. So big tip is section your hair. And if you see what I have here, I've got 3 sections in the front, and then I've got 2 in the back. And you can section the hair for whatever works for you. What I would say is just think of ways that you could rinse your hair while working in sections that would be easiest to you. So this is going to give us that roadmap, and that way we can always just focus on one section, and if we have to, we can process, rinse, blow dry, and then move on to a second section. That way you maintain control, you know how long the lightener is sitting on the hair, and you have a roadmap for what you need to process as you move along, and you don't get mixed up. Because what we don't want is to be applying lightener, have to rinse it early, and then have to pick out the hair that we did and the hair that we didn't do and accidentally overlap. So sections are going to be a big deal for this one. They give us the roadmap, and that way if we wanted to do block color, this is also going to help us with that. So I will be focusing today because we've only got a limited amount of time. So we'll be working on a block of hair. And the hair that I'll be working on is this little block right here. So as we begin, we need to know what tools we're going to be using before we jump. So the first thing I'm going to say you want to use is obviously the lightener and the developer. So the lightener I'm using is Wella, and this does do 7 levels of lift, which is all you're going to need, especially if you're removing color. It's got a very moisturizing quality to it, which whenever we're lifting with lightener, we want something that's going to enhance the moisture a little bit because that's what we're losing in the process. So I'm a big fan of Wella. I use this in the salon all the time. Wella is a staple brand, so that is also what I will be using today. This is also going to be another shocking part. The developer that we pair with the lightener is actually going to only be a 10 volume. I'm encouraging so many of you to please just use 10 volume. We always go to the store and we want quick results, so everybody goes for the 30 and the 40 volume. I don't think I've used 40 in years, and I specialize in these high lifts and these dimensional blondes, and the truth is I can get a platinum blonde out of using a 10 volume. It's going to leave the hair healthier, and I'm going to show you how to do that today with our technique. If you're removing color from hair, there's going to be a little bit more of a chemical reaction going on. And if you've ever used box dye, whether it be from a non-supply beauty supply chain like Walmart or Target, this is where you can run into some chemical reactions that aren't as friendly to the hair. So when we use a lower volume developer, that's actually going to give us more assurance that we're not going to shred the hair during the process. And I will show you with technique, you can get a very good lift with 10 volume. The worst that happens is you don't get as many levels, and that's probably going to happen when you're lifting permanent color out, but you can always reapply. It gets dangerous if you want to reapply and you've already been using higher levels of developer. So if I haven't said it enough, please just use a 10 and never above a 20 when removing permanent hair color at home. And we're going to go in sections. So now that we know which lightener and developer we're using, I'm going to go through brushes as well. So you'll see when I use an applicator brush for 2 parts of this application. You'll see that one is short and thick. The other one is going to be long and more blended and thinner. And they also serve 2 different jobs. And when we go through the technique, I will show you what those do. But make sure you have your applicator brushes ready. And we're also going to be using foils. I feel like foils are underutilized by people that do their hair at home, but foils add more control when we're lifting and we're using those chemicals. So please use them on subsections. If you ever need added heat, I never add heat. I usually use a foil just to incubate, just to give us that high lift. No added extra heat, which is also going to keep our hair healthier, but still giving us the lift that we want. And of course, make sure when you're using bowls, they're non-metallic. You don't want to be using anything metallic when you're using lightener, but there are so many bowls at Sally Beauty. The one I have here today is actually from Good Dye Young, but Salon Care is probably one of the more affordable brands, and they work very, very well. So anytime you go to Sally Beauty, make sure you're picking up these things to do your hair at home. So now that we have all the materials we're going to use to lift her hair, we can begin with the technique. So I already have my lightener pre-made, equal parts developer and the powder, and I've mixed that in. The first thing I'm going to do is pull out the section I want to lift. I'm going to leave everything still in clips. And what you want to do is just pull out 1/8 of an inch section at the very bottom of your section. So this will be a subsection. It should be thin enough that you could read a newspaper through it, because using thin sections is a technique I use all the time in the salon, and that is going to give you the most lift, the most incubation, and it's going to be the safest and most controlled way to do a high lift. So we're going to pin up all of the hair that's not pulled down in our subsection, and I'm going to place that in a foil. And make sure you guys can see that. So I tuck that foil right underneath that section, and I'm gonna take my longer brush. This is gonna give us more coverage because it's got a longer tip on it. And it's also gonna give us more saturation because I can blend with it. Now, if you notice where I placed it is not on the root. So about a 1/2 inch down from the base of the hair is where you're gonna begin to color and place that lightener. The reason that is because we're going to do the regrowth section in our second step. That's gonna lift quicker than the mid shaft of the hair. The mid shaft of the hair is the hardest hair to lift. So we wanna make sure that's getting the most attention and sits on during its own processing time, the first lightening around. Now, another tip is if the ends of your hair are very, very damaged, you might also wanna leave those out during this process. However, if you know that you're gonna be cutting your ends or you have a lot of color buildup on there and they're not damaged, you can add that into this. So we're only hitting the mid shaft and the ends, and sometimes just the mid shaft, depending on the health of your hair. So the couple things I want you to know is do not hit the root. We're gonna leave a 1/2 inch out from the base, so we're not touching that. We're gonna do heavy saturation in thin sections. So once I've done that, I'm gonna close up my foil. And a great foiling comb makes this so much easier. As I use that to bend my foil, I can get nice straight lines and I stay nice and organized. So now that foil should be sitting. We have no lightener coming out or touching the base of the hair. Next thing you're gonna do is continue. So another 1/8 of an inch section, and you're gonna notice a lot of repetition in how this goes. I'm gonna pull that down directly above the foil I just placed. Same 1/8 of an inch, should be able to read a newspaper through it. I'm gonna grab my foil, tuck that directly underneath, and without touching the base, leaving a 1/2 inch section out, I'm gonna paint the mid shaft. Now, the amount you leave out can depend a little bit. What we're trying to avoid is the heat from the head processing that hair at a much quicker rate. That's why you see hot roots a lot, where the hair at the very base looks brighter, and the heat from our head will actually process lightener a lot quicker. Because the mid shaft is farther down in our foil, it's not getting that intense heat that our natural body puts off. Also, the hair is older, which is actually very interesting and people don't realize. When your hair's growing out, it's almost, when it's new growth, I treat it like baby hair. It's still thin. It hasn't completely like metastasized into the hair that it's gonna be. So once it gets past that little 1/2 inch point, your hair actually, the melanin gets harder and it's actually harder to lift, on top of it being farther from the scalp and not receiving as much heat. That's why we're applying the lightener just to those mid shaft areas, because we know they're gonna be hard to budge. And the ends of our hair, even though they are older and they might have kind of metastasized and gotten harder, they're more damaged because they're older. So our hair tends to get thinner toward the bottom. That's why we feel like we have split ends and we constantly have to cut our hair. So that's why you would leave that out, because that might actually process faster, if not the same as the root of the hair. So just hitting the mid shaft is what's going to give us a nice even lift for when we go in the second time. So same thing, thin section, making sure we're saturating. And you can even roll the hair horizontally, vertically. Just make sure it's all getting touched. And same thing. We're going to tuck that in, fold. And I can give you one guess on what we would be doing next. We would be pulling an 1/8 of an inch section down and doing the same process. So you would continue this process all the way up this section. And that would be our completed first section. You could choose to stop, wait the full 50 minutes. And the truth is, lightener doesn't ever completely stop working, which is what I want you to be careful about. I say 50 minutes because that's when you're supposed to be rinsing it off your hair. It becomes highly inactive, yet the chemical reaction never completely stops. So after 50 minutes, you're not going to get that much more of a lift, but it's still going to be tearing at your hair. So to keep your hair healthy, you really shouldn't be leaving it on longer than 50 minutes, and it would need a reapplication at that time anyway. So that's why you want to be rinsing it off your hair at that time. And like I said, if you're a DIYer, going section by section is fine, or just doing block sections, because block color is really in right now. You could just focus on one section and see how it goes and still have trendy hair and still get to play with pastels and vivids. So you could just finish this section, let it process, and then you're good to go until we get to the next step. So another thing I want to show you with what happens is I have some footage of foils that I did in the salon, and I was doing block color on my client. And I'll help give you a visual for how some of these foils do look. If you notice the foils, they were actually very thick and puffy, and that's what it looks like when hair starts to react with minerals in the hair. And what can happen when those foils are as puffy as you saw in that footage is they can begin to bleed out. So even though we left out the base of the hair for each of these sections, if we have a lot of minerals in our hair and we didn't do our pre-clarifying treatment, those foils could expand, lightener will come out and actually bleed over other parts of the hair. So it's a great way to avoid a hair fail. Make sure we did our pre-clarifying treatment, because those foils in her hair were after a clarifying treatment and she still had some reaction. Luckily, they didn't bleed over. But I wanted you guys to see that because it really does make a difference. And when that happens, we're having more chemical reactions go on in the hair. And the quicker the foils heat up, the quicker that chemical reaction happens, that's when our hair doesn't fare so well in the long term. So I want you guys to recognize these signs. So when you're doing your hair at home, you can kind of go, maybe I need another clarifying treatment. Maybe I need to find out what's in my water. Also, if you've been using non-beauty supply chain box colors, they contain a lot of metallics, and a lot of times the dye's a lot heavier, and they use volumes that are designed for everybody because they want that box color to work for everybody. So what can happen is you've got heavy metallics, heavy pigment, and then you've also put it in with the high volume. When you go to lift that, you can get a really, really big chemical reaction. So the other part I want you to know about is, aside from even just a soft bubbling, which can still be okay, it can get worse. So if you ever feel like the foils turn too hot, or they feel like a pan, or they heat up very quickly after applying, please rinse your hair immediately and stop coloring your hair. It might mean that your hair cannot handle the lift. So if your foils ever feel as hot as a pan, and you will know the difference, it's very obvious, because a little bit of heat is normal. The type of heat I'm talking about is you'll notice it and it hurts. So just use cool water, get rid of it. Don't lift your hair anymore. So that's why I wanted you to see a little bit of that footage, just so we could avoid those DIY fails at home, because hair can be so pretty if we know what we're doing and we're doing the right application and we're prepping our hair the correct way. So the next part I wanted to show you was, after I lifted that client's hair with the foils, leaving out her base, what that after product looked like. So what did her hair pull? Because when we're lifting through one end hair, it's got a lot of levels to go through. She also has a lot of hair history, because sometimes people use color at home, sometimes they go to the salon, sometimes they use a demi-permanent, sometimes they use a permanent hair color. And when you use lightener, you can actually see what's living in that hair and what that person has done. So let me show you this photo of when I removed her foils and what that looked like. So as you look at this photo, you can see where her hair is darker, where it is lighter, and see how her ends are the lightest. That's where that thin hair is. That's the hair that gets the quickest amount of damage. So we agreed that she was going to get her hair cut to her collarbone. That way she doesn't have to deal with any of that. But you can see there was a time toward the bottom when she was box coloring. Then there's a little bit of area where it was a little softer. Then she's got another dark area again. And then the things closest to the scalp lifted a little better. So it's a little zebra stripey, but that is a lot of times when you're lifting very dark permanent hair color, what you're gonna see, because you're dealing with the parts of the hair structure that are newer, that are weaker, and you're dealing with parts of the hair structure that are solid and hold on to color a lot more, and the hair history. Everything she's done to her hair, you can see lifted. So that will also be normal if that's what you pull. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It just is revealing the underlying pigment. So let's say we're going to move on in our demo that we did this whole section of hair, right? So this would have been filled all the way to the top, and I've got all my little foils. Now, if you're at home, maybe you would have already rinsed this, blow dried, then you would just go back in and tap that base. So I'm going to reopen the foil. So and we always pull from the first one we did, because that's the one that needs to pop first. So, but we're going to pretend like this is already processed. She's good to go. And I don't recommend touching lightener. Always use gloves. And this is where the short brush comes in. So our short brush is what's going to give us a higher loading of product because it's thicker. So we're going to get a lot in one scoop. It's shorter, so we can actually get a more pinpointed application. Because what you don't want to do is overlift hair that doesn't need to be lifted again. So if you pulled really well and you reached a level 8, 9, and you're ready to go for your vivids or pastels, then you don't need to touch that previously lifted area. So what you would do is you would load your brush, the short one, find that base and just tap. And make sure you're doing both sides, and you can even outline the area a little bit, because that way you know you're hitting every angle of the hair and you won't have any missed spots. So we make sure we tap that, because now that hair will be lifted and catch up to the rest. And if you have spots, which you probably do if you're lifting a lower level permanent hair color, say it didn't all lift the same way and you looked like that photo that I just put up. What you would then do is during this application, when we go back and we tap the root and the regrowth, we would also tap those darker areas because they would need another lift. I'm still only using 10 volume, and you'll see if you use these thinner sections, you'll actually get high lifts. So after you're going through and you make sure you're using your shorter brush, you're pinpointing your areas, you're tapping that base, and you work through the hair, you would let that process, rinse with cool water. So after we've tapped the sections, we've gone through the hair, and if you do have to tap those mid-length sections again, you can also put those in a foil again. That way you're keeping everything organized. However, I do recommend, if you don't reach the level of lift that you want the first time, give your hair a break, because even if you can lift twice in one day, you might not notice the damage that day, but over time the hair is weaker and can actually kind of fall apart over time. So the best is to only pull one level of lift, meaning you do the first application, you hit the mid shaft area. Second application, you go ahead for that regrowth and you make that match the rest. So after you have that one set of lift, even if it's uneven all over, I would honestly condition, use bond builders, because your hair is sulfide bonds and those break over time, and they can also break during chemical damage. So if you're using a bond builder, it's going to seal that back up. If you're using hydrating products, it's going to add that moisture back in that you're losing during the lightening process. And if you focus on keeping that hair healthy and then letting yourself get a little bit of root before reapplying, not only is your new virgin hair going to lift better and make your overall color every time you add on that lightener look a lot cleaner, but your hair's not going to be falling apart. And my favorite thing I wanted to mention for processes like this is Sally Beauty sells and this is a bond sustainer hair color. So they have it in clear. So if you ever just wanted to do a bond sustaining treatment, you can use that at in the shower at home, and that it wouldn't add any color. However, this one, because say you lifted to like a level 6, maybe it wasn't that high, you have a lot of orange in your hair, you want to use a vibrant color that's going to cover all that up and kind of camouflage our different levels, because you can do that with vivids. So with pastels, your hair has to be around a level 9, 10 to play in that field. So if your hair hasn't reached that yet, you probably want to play in the vivids. And the great thing about this is, because it's a bond sustaining color, we're going to protect those disulfide bonds. We're going to heal up the hair, but we can also add the pigment, which is semi-permanent. So we can actually pull that back out of the hair when we go to lift again a lot easier, because this is only going to lay on the outer coating of hair, but it's going to tone the hair and filter it to look like a bright color. So we can disguise all those crazy levels until we're ready to lift again. And these come in all kinds of colors. This one I chose Red Flame because I feel like this one is so bright and so vivid, and it's got all those healing qualities. It's a great way to like disguise an uneven lift until you're ready again. So it kind of does the healing, it does the coloring, and it does the toning, because I think another thing we're doing is a lot of people get caught up on toning, especially uneven hair, because technically each part of that hair would need a different toner. A lot of us aren't colorists at home, but if we were lifting to prepare for these fun pastel and vivid colors, this is a great option because it's going to tone the hair a fun color, disguise everything, and you can still work on that underneath hair when the time comes to get the maximum lift, to be able to play with different colors, and it'll still be clean and healthy. So I love using a bond sustainer with color, uberless. Please get this if you're worried about toning and you just want it to look good, because it's a great disguiser. Go more vivid, go more bold, go more deep in tone if you want to disguise more. The lighter you go, the more it'll act like a softer filter, and you might be able to see those varying differences. And the last photo I'm going to show you today is what I used on my client, which you saw her uneven lift. I went ahead and colored her block color with a vivid color, and it looked something like this, which I think is very easy to pull off. So if you're using Vivids and you have an uneven lift, look at that. It looks bright, it's bold, it kind of hides everything, and it's a great way to wear fashion colors sooner than later. And you don't even need to be a hair colorist. You just have to know how to do those proper applications and keep your hair together. Thank you guys so much for joining us on DIY University on lifting color for platinum, pastels, and vivids. I hope you got something out of this, maybe something new. Please follow us on Sally Beauty. My handle is Emily Boulin Hair. Thanks for joining.